Paranormal King Radio Network, bringing you the best paranormal hosts and guests. Bringing you the best paranormal shows and features. Playing the top musical artists from around the world. Paranormal King Radio Network. With the best paranormal hosts and guests. The best in paranormal shows and features. Playing the best musical artists from around the world. Paranormal King Radio Network. The paranormal will never be the same.
You are listening to Paranormalities and Ponderings with the C.A.S.P.I.R Paranormal team. Brought to you by the Paranormal King Radio Network and hosted by Frank Lee. Join us for the next hour as we discuss ghosts, spirits, hauntings, and other worldly phenomena that has yet to be explained in hopes of finding answers. This show is meant to be a resource for those of you who, like us, seek to find answers to the unknown. We hope you find it informative and enjoy the show. And once again, thank you for listening.
Thank you for tuning in to Paranormalities and Ponderings. I'm your host, Frank Lee, and this is on a very special day, Veterans Day 2014, a day that's very near and dear to my heart. And we've got a great show for you. We thank you for taking time out on this holiday to tune into the show. And we have, it's been a fantastic day. I've seen so many things. And to any of the veterans that are out there listening, whether you served in the past, you're serving now, or you're planning to enlist, first off, we thank you for your service. So we appreciate each and every one of you for what you do. And with that, we'll move on and talk about some paranormal. We've got an excellent guest tonight. We have Ty Phillips. He's with the Texas Parapsychology Society, and he's going to be discussing some of the things that we encounter and some of the things that we need to look for. So, Ty, how are you doing tonight?
Well, it's interesting. We're talking about anxiety tonight. I actually have it's interesting you brought me on the show because I have general anxiety disorder and social anxiety disorder. So if I start mumbling, you gotta let me know because that's what it is.
Okay.
But yeah, as I'm fixing to explain too, it's kind of some anxiety issues that led me to get into the paranormal, interestingly enough.
Mm-hmm. That, and that's something that I believe is something that paranormal investigators need to be more aware of. As we were talking before we started broadcasting about how there's kind of been a trend where a lot of your teams now aren't really studying parapsychology quite as much as I personally feel like they should be. But not only parapsychology, but you have to look at psychology in itself. And you have to be able to evaluate this client and factor in certain things as, what is this client going through? What is their living situation? What is their overall health? How is their, parapsychology focuses so much on the person and the experience that if I just go and focus on a location, that it leaves out. And that's why I believe that it's such a critical topic that needs to be covered about how anxiety, depression, other disorders can affect a haunting. You have to ask yourself, some people live in a house and they report it's haunted, the activity's through the roof, it's just off the charts. They move out, another family moves in, they report nothing. They move out, another family moves in, the activity's stirred back up. It's the people that are the catalyst. So hopefully some of the answers that you can give us tonight can help us kind of understand some of that.
Yeah, sure. I think that's one of the things I was considering talking about tonight. If you were curious about how I got started and everything, and I've had paranormal experiences in my life, and I've always been interested in the paranormal. I did have a couple experiences that were kind of traumatic and a lot of anxiety. So me getting into the ghost hunting thing was kind of my way of battling my own anxiety with, the paranormal. I remember the first time it's like, oh, I'm going into a house that's really, really supposedly haunted. How am I gonna handle this? And and now it's like people say, oh, you listen to EVPs? I'm like, yes, I've listened to EVPs in real time. And don't you get scared? I'm like, well, no. I dealt with that. I moved on. There is this new modern ghost hunting movement that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember back in the 90s, I couldn't find anybody out there that was doing this kind of thing.
Right.
Or anything. And all of a sudden you had these television shows that came out and, hey, if a bunch of plumbers can do it, anybody can do it, right?
Exactly.
Well, yeah, and it opened up a lot of doors. That's the good thing. But I think a lot of, at the same time, it's brought a lot of misinformation as well. And that's something I'll probably talk about tonight.
Definitely.
But here's, I guess, my first question. Are you scared of spiders or snakes?
I'm not very fond of snakes.
Why is that?
I think with me, it's a spider. I know if worse comes to worse, I can get outside a spider's jumping or striking distance a lot easier than I can of snakes. And I believe that has a lot to do with it, because I know a snake can strike from 2/3 its body length, and I might not see that snake in time to get away from it. So that's always been my personal theory.
Right, and I see here on the chat board we got this response that says "ooh" to both, right?
Right.
And the thing is, the majority of snakes, the majority of spiders, are extremely beneficial to us.
Mm-hmm.
garter snakes, king snakes, they're not going to hurt us. You know, even the ones that are poisonous, yeah, the copperheads will chase you, but a lot of the venomous ones will try to avoid you. You know, if they do bite, they're not likely to inject the venom. They have to really count down to get the venom in.
Right.
But it's that kind of anxiety, that fear, you know. And you have people that say the only kind of good snake is a bad snake, is a dead snake.
Right.
And you know, even if you try to educate them on the benefits, you know, they're like, no, if I see a snake, it's dead. I'm gonna take a gun and shoot it. So
right.
that's just part of being human. Is you know, sometimes irrational fears of things and everything else. So what brings me to my next question? What about the Ouija board? Why are we so scared of a piece of wood and a piece of plastic on top of it?
That's another great point.
And so, you know, my first question is how is an Ouija board different than a KT meter? How is it different than a recorder that we stick out there and we have this idea that somehow the Ouija board is now with magic or going to burn demons. Well, and if you look at the history of the Ouija board itself, it comes from the spiritual fair. They were using all kinds of devices like that back in the spiritual era. This was, you know, starting in the 1840s, 1850s, and 60s and 70s. It was a very common thing back then. Now, granted, most of the mediums in the spiritual fair were shown to be frauds, okay? But the Ouija board became a harder game in the 1890s. And in World War I, the spiritualists adopted it again. Well, and the spiritual movement was really taking away from the Christian church, and so the Christians denounced it as evil, it's only that. And then in 1973, you had the movie The Exorcist came out. The Exorcist was a big cultural thing that happened. I mean, also the people were just scared of demonic possessions after that. And the basis of The Exorcist, the book and everything, it's the media. Again, it was based on the Ouija board. And so over time, the Ouija board has taken on this persona that it's somehow evil. And so it's that whole expectation that that's what it is. But we don't have that same thing with the KT meter. And that's basically, you're doing the same thing. You're trying to use something to try to communicate with the afterlife. So what would make it so much different?
Right.
And it's really kind of an anxiety-driven thing. So one of the things I was kind of looking at is, you know, what are some causes of anxiety in the paranormal? You know, I was also looking at, before that, getting into that phobia. Phobia is an extreme fear. You know, and phobias are, the definition would be experiences that are persistent fear that is excessive and unreasonable, and achieve when a person approaches a particular situation or object or anticipates the approach of it. They will experience as a result of a situation as the unreasonable and excessive. Well, phobias, where do they come from? And a lot of it comes from negative and traumatic experiences. You know? So if you look at fear of flying. That's a pretty recognizable phobia. And ever since 2011, fear of flying has just gotten extremely worse. And so when we look at the media and the idea that we've got television shows on every night now about ghost hunting and things like that, are these things generating some of the fears and anxieties the media itself produces? Power of suggestion. There's all this media out there, and can anxiety be a result, or the whole, just the paranormal experience be the result of power of suggestion in itself? There are a couple of psychologists that study the paranormal, and they kind of look at it from personality perspectives and other things. And it's Horan and Lang. And in 1997, they published a journal article in the Perception Motor Skills. That's a pretty prestigious psychological journal.
Yes.
And what they did was they took 22 people and divided them into two groups. Okay, and the first group, they told them, hey, we're gonna visit the theater. You're gonna go to 5 different areas in the theater, and they were told it was just simply a building that was under renovation. The other group, they took them in and they kind of told them, hey, this is a haunted area, and what do you think? And so afterwards, they did some testing afterwards, and what they found was that this group that it was suggested to them that was haunted, they come out and reporting all kinds of paranormal type experiences.
Right.
And the only differences is that one group was told that it was haunted and the other group wasn't. How come, if this place really was haunted, how come the other group didn't experience anything?
That's an excellent point.
So just the idea that you're going to go on a ghost hunt kind of gives you that power of suggestion that, hey, that maybe there is paranormal there, And I've seen that, quite a bit, You're working with historical places and you're during the day, nothing ever happens. You take them on a ghost hunt later on, and all kinds of things always start happening.
Right. Well, and the same applies too with, I see this so many times, that it seems that people automatically associate old or abandoned buildings with hauntings, with paranormal activity. They'll see an old building that's just about to fall in, and they'll say, I'd love to investigate there. And it's like, why? It's just an old building. And people tend to overlook the fact that, the activity doesn't necessarily, isn't necessarily linked to the age of the building or the condition that it's in. So that's very true, and that goes quite well with you talking about the power of suggestion, because most of us, especially in the paranormal field, we love our horror movies. We love trying to get a good scare. And just the general public, for that matter, it's like it's programmed into us that these old, abandoned, creepy-looking places have got to have some type of activity in them. They've got to be haunted. And that goes along very well. I mean, I'm so glad that you brought that up about power of suggestion, because that is something that I've seen for myself. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I didn't really go into the sort of the tale of repair for tonight. But there's a lot of research for that's one of the things that they were looking at. They were looking at demand characteristics and cues and things like that, things in the environment that might suggest that. So there's actually been some good research out there on that too, is whether people think it's haunted just because it looks haunted too.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes back to why do the television shows, why do they have to have the lights out?
Right.
And it really is. Why, if you're going to go on an investigation, why are you turning the lights out? And when you turn the lights out, the unknown becomes more. I mean, you get more of that whole feeling of unknown. You can't see what's out there. I remember reading on one website, somebody that's been doing investigations for a long time, made the comment that ever since Paranormal State came out, all of a sudden he got more and more cases about people thinking their house was demonic,
Right.
He's situated by this television show. Ghost hunters, this thing they call it fear cage. The thing about ghost hunters is they give you these terms like matrix and fear cage, but they don't tell you anywhere where they get their information from. And, that information about the fear cage actually comes from work by Dr. person here with the God helmet, which you can learn about on my. I got my website through paranormal.com. You got videos and a lot about the person's work on there. But he created very specific EMF frequencies in the brain to kind of disconnect the left and right hemisphere of the brain and stimulate certain parts of the brain. So it's a very complex frequency that he was doing. First of all, if EMF just causes to have some experiences, your cell phone would make you do that all the time. And there was actually Christopher French, who's a kind of, over in Europe, he's kind of a skeptic/critic, and he tried using Dr. Persinger's research and also Handy's research with the 19 hertz standing frequencies and create a haunted room. And it failed. It didn't work. So the research out there suggests that this whole fear state idea is really nothing. Yet I've had people come to me and say, well, I've got high EMF in my thing. Is this
Right.
positive? And it causes them anxiety that they have high EMF in their house. And it's because the television's perpetuated it, and the ghost hunters came through and investigated the places and talked about the high EMF. And so after a while, the lady who works in the place, it's the bed and breakfast, she started getting anxiety about the fact that probably high EMF might be what's causing that. Another great example is Most Haunted. We talk about orbs and how digital cameras, it's dust, and I've got great examples on the website of explaining why the orb phenomena exists. It's how the digital cameras can't process the analog signal.
Right.
Well, you see people all the time on websites posting their orb pictures where they taking with a digital camera, and they're so fearful because an orb shows up in there. And this orb thing is all because of the television show Most Haunted. Mm-hmm. They're looking for ratings, and so they're the ones that try to really suggest to the public that orbs were ghosts. And I know Dr. Sarian O'Keefe was a part of that show for a long time, and other people have come and criticized just how fake that show really was. It's really about ratings, and I think the downfall of that is this media is creating some of the anxiety that we see. We have to be prepared to address it.
Right, and something that I feel too is a major mistake that I see is so many people refer to a lot of websites and paranormal TV shows for their sole source of education about the paranormal. And it's like we'd mentioned the trend of them getting away from parapsychology and really learning a lot of the other aspects that they should focus on. But something that I've talked to, and I can't tell you how many people I've asked the question, how many books have you read? And they look at you like, what? Books? No, I haven't read any. And it's like, well, why not? What is your primary source of information?
The staff only published 3 books, right?
Right. And you're sitting there and you're asking them, well, if you're not I try to explain to them that a lot of the information that you see on websites are excerpts from these books that have been copied, pasted, sometimes paraphrased, and it's basically handed from one to the other to the other to the other. And by actually going back, looking at the cracking that book open, looking in there, seeing the source of that information, then they can learn it for themselves and get such a more broad spectrum, and see how it ties everything in so much better. And that's why I feel that you're seeing a lot of the key elements of investigations start to kind of shift and lose their focus. It's because some of that is the people haven't trained themselves to focus on some things.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the reason why I created a website, and right now you can look at it at provingparanormal.com. It's, you look at it through the White Crow Foundation. It's Proving Paranormal because I was actually in the process of writing a book, and Proving Paranormal was kind of the topic of the book. If I ever publish that book, I'm probably actually thinking about publishing it under a pseudonym. But the website itself was created so that I could put out information where you can find a lot of this other information that's out there, journal articles, sources from books, things like that. And that's the thing. Parapsychology, psychical research, it's been around for over 120 years, and it's really, the things that we've learned from it is kind of really largely ignored by the new modern ghost hunting movement. What you're saying kind of leads me into the next area is do ghost hunters perpetuate the anxiety themselves? And I was following a couple of years ago in 2012, Palm Rivers, New Jersey. You probably heard about the case where this family sued the landlord because they wanted their deposit back. They claimed that the house was haunted and they were in fear of their lives, right?
Right. I remember that well.
Yeah, I actually followed that case and actually, and found further evidence of what continued to happen with that. That court actually went to people's court. And they came fought in favor of the landlord. But there was actually, the family was seeing bizarre, they were seeing lights flicker, they were having bizarre noises. One person claimed to be grabbed on the arm, blankets were sliding off the bed, and someone claimed to see a dark, shapeless apparition. Now, I don't know all the details. Some of these might be explained by psychological things, some of them might be explained by other things. I simply don't know.
Right.
But we had a couple of paranormal groups come in. One group came in and they talked to CBT, and it was published online, and it was just a terrible EVP. They claimed to say that it said, "Let it burn."
Wow.
I don't know. Even if it says "Let it burn," what does that mean? Let what burn? Let the candle burn, or let the house burn?
Right.
That automatically put that as making it sound like it was obviously something negative.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of a paragraph that was straight from the book I'm writing. So the landlord argued that the couple was having financial difficulties and was trying to get out of the lease, so they were not able to pay the rent. Some early speculation was that the couple wanted the house for a child custody issue, to show that they had a good place to house children, although this claim was not continued to be substantiated in further reports. The landlord filed a countersuit stating that the claims of the ghosts will scare away potential renters or buyers of the property, caught in the middle of two paranormal investigation teams. These teams made their investigations public and likely without the consent of the homeowner. One team classified it as having paranormal activity, but they shied away from calling it a haunting. The other team disagreed, saying that the site of an active word until it was a haunting. The media reports that the second team actively communicated with the spirit by using a flashlight, where the flashlight turned on and off. Now, you know how the flashlight trick works, right?
Right.
Okay, I mean, the whole flashlight thing is basically, it's bumped. It's there's a great explanation for why the thing turns off and on. They claimed that there was this unseen force making two flashes for yes and one blink for no. And so then you had a pastor come in, a third and totally different response, claiming that it was a demon. Now the investigation team, one of them had made their investigation public, and this was supposed to be the one that published the BDP, and they also published a video of a bowling pin that fell in the basement. And you watch the video, and it was totally under control from what I can see. You got 12 people in the house walking around. So, it's kind of hard to say where did the EVP come from, or did the bowling ball happen because they were walking up the stairs. I mean, I don't know, but the whole investigation just brings that in. And so, when these investigation teams came in, it kind of really perpetuated these people to it fueled their belief that their lives were somehow endangered.
Yes.
They had to get out of the house again. And when the couple made their house public, or made it public that this house was haunted, the court found in favor of the landlord, and just earlier this year, back in January, the landlord had sued them again, and now the landlord won the case, and he actually got, I don't know how much, but he actually got a monetary value from the fact that he can't rent or sell his house now.
Right.
And these two investigation teams, he could turn around and technically sue them too, because they published this information without his consent about his house. So they could easily be held as liable as well.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I have seen that in some areas there are actually laws that state, and I'm sure some of the listeners are familiar with this. You've seen the post of, or the pictures posted that show a sign that says, house for sale, not haunted, and things like that. And there are laws written in some areas that if a home has a history of paranormal activity, that legally the landlord or the previous owner is to notify the next tenant or buyer, and they can actually be held legally responsible if they don't, if there is a history of that. And what I've heard so many cases of is like you had mentioned, where maybe there really isn't activity going on, but they make this claim, they'll try to use it, like in your situation, the child custody case is going on. That's an excellent issue. They're trying to say, well, the children shouldn't be there. This house has all of this going on. They're trying to say the landlord I wasn't notified. I should be able to get out of my lease, or, I should be able to, get my deposit back. And you really have to educate yourself as investigators so you don't get caught in one of those situations. Like you pointed out, two teams were going against each other inadvertently.
Even a pastor, came up with three different takes on it too. You're talking about that in 1991. There was the Supreme Court of New York Appellate Division. The case was called Bosky versus Ackley. And the decision was that the seller has to disclose if a house has a reputation of being haunted if there is a fiduciary relationship, or if there is fraud or misrepresentation, because such reputation can impair the value of the house.
Right.
So there's there are places where that could definitely be a problem. And so we have to, you kind of have to be careful when you get into these situations where you're trying to do an investigation on a residential area like this. The TAPS model, I guess, that when you've adopted, is that you investigate overnight. If you do a one-shot thing.
Mm-hmm. Well,
is one night all it's going to take to determine whether there's actually paranormal activity there or not? If an apparition is usually seen around Christmas time, and you're going to go investigate on July 4th, are you really going to catch the activity that's being reported? The activity is reported to happen around this time.
That's an excellent point. I've said at many locations that are notoriously haunted for hours upon end and not had anything happen.
Right. And so if you were to tell somebody, I've been here all night and nothing's happened, this place isn't haunted, Well, maybe it actually is, and the person who's experienced it. I mean, what are you kind of telling that person? Well, maybe you're just crazy because there's nothing here. So it goes the same with trying to debunk something. If you go in and you find an alternate explanation, does that really totally rule out the paranormal completely? It's good to be something paranormal that's going on, And I noticed that somebody put out there was something on our chat room about trying to convince someone about somebody, and that's the thing. When you have a client that's already got their mind made up about something, it's hard to convince them of something otherwise.
Right.
No, my house is haunted. So what happens, and I've had this happen too, you see it all the time. Well, if you don't, people are wanting an answer, but they want their answer. And when they bring one team in, and that team doesn't give them the answer they want, well, they call in the next team. And so they're going to keep going until they find the team that's going to give them the answer that they want. And so, and then you have these different teams that are now, you got paranormal drama because, spirits, and it creates a lot of problems. So,
and you bring up such a great point there because, one, you have a lot of teams, there's not really a standard for, what is the minimum level of training that a paranormal investigator should have? We don't have that standard in the field. This team, Team A may be a team that has been doing it for, they've been investigating for 10, 15 years. Everyone on the team is seasoned veterans of the paranormal that are specifically trained in their target roles, and Team B may be a team that's been together for a year, 2 years. They watched a few shows and bought some equipment off eBay or something. And, so naturally they go in to investigate the same place. More than likely, Team A is going to have significantly different findings than Team B. And like you were saying, the drama starts up and all of that, because it's like that certain amount of ambiguity has been placed on the location. And that goes back to the suggestiveness, or to the power of suggestion. People are saying, this place is haunted. The client is saying, my house is haunted, and doesn't want to accept any other answer. And, they have that anxiety that they're living in because they are convinced that it is haunted, and they're in danger, and they're not going to accept any other solution in some situations.
Right. In our previous discussion when we were talking about this house in New Jersey, and you have all these different investigation teams, and they each come up with their own classification. The full classifications that we get, the residual, intelligent, poltergeist, demons, it's easy to say, okay, well, we'll pick one and that's what it's probably going to be. But, this is perpetuated by television, but there's some real problems with that. And one of the things that I've often done people with is like, okay, so you're a paranormal investigator. If I was to sit here and say, oh, I'm sitting in my house right now, but as I was sitting there, I saw my dad just walk into my room, and he looked at me, and then he disappeared. Well, my dad lives 300 miles from here.
Right.
And he does nothing in my house. How did he get in my room? I get a phone call 30 minutes later from my stepmother saying that my dad passed away from a heart attack.
Wow.
If I was to come to you and say, hey, I think maybe my bedroom now is now being haunted by my dad, what would you do? And their first answer is, well, we'll gather up the cameras and the recorders, and we're going to go to get your house. It's a haunted. My next question is, why? This is what we call a crisis apparition. And this is something that was really uncovered in the research by early psychical researchers back in the 1880s, over more than 130 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And a crisis apparition, it only happens one time. It's within a time of a crisis. The person having the crisis doesn't necessarily have to pass away. They could be sick, they could be ill.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, back in the 1880s, they're sitting there writing their diaries of this experience, but they don't have telephones. They don't get the report until 3 days later, the news of what happened. And then they're sitting and looking at what they wrote in their journal just 3 days earlier. And parapsychology, the early psychical researchers, and they thought that a crisis apparition was a good example of an apparition that's generated by ESP.
Mm-hmm.
You receive the signal through ESP, and then your brain kind of interprets it as if this apparition is in front of you, where it's not really there in front of you. The information's there, but your brain interprets that information. And you look at the 4 classifications, it doesn't have anything that correlates with ESP. And this is a problem for people who may have some ESP ability,
Mm-hmm.
And I think ESP is not something where you have it all the time. I think it can be very, very sporadic. I myself, I've done several precognitive things that are pretty amazing, but I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a precog. I can predict the future, because that's just not, I've done precognitive things, okay? But in this particular situation, the ESP, it has to be, for a crisis apparition, it has to be somebody who's close to you. So there's that connection there, the human bond that
Yes.
helps make that. So over all these years, the psychical researchers, all their theories always had some kind of ESP element to it. And just as an example, in 1980, the 23rd Annual Convention of the Parapsychology Association met. And Carl Osis, he presented 6 of the big theories throughout the years, and that were really discussed and put out there by psychical researchers, parapsychology. 3 of them kind of felt like there was a ghost that existed and it was there, and 3 of them just kind of felt like we're getting the information from somewhere and reading it. The first one is the phantasmogenic center theory by Myers.
Mm-hmm.
Myers was one of the early psychical researchers, founders. Electric body theory by Hart. There's the ESP-PK theory. Telepathy theory. And this one was seen by Gurney, another early psychical researcher, and Tyrell in his book Apparitions in 1953. Clairvoyance theory by Louisa Ryan, the wife of J.B. Ryan. And then there's the retrocognition theory. And, these 6 theories that were discussed at this thing in the 1980s, every single one of them has some kind of ESP thing to it.
Right.
There may be cases where ESP has something to do with the paranormal. There are some cases where ESP may not have something. I know you and I discussed, maybe even like before all this, we started the show. What's the significance of a person? One person. These people live in a house and something happens. These people live in a house and nothing happens.
Right.
What if it's a person? What if it's a person that triggers this? I noticed that somebody said something about residual activity. What if it's a person that's triggering residual energy through ESP or psychokinesis? It could be a person that's generating these effects.
Exactly.
And that's actually within one of the 6 theories there was this idea that this residual activity was something that's generated by somebody who has some kind of ESP ability.
And it's funny that you bring that up, because in so many investigations, and I'm sure that a lot of the listeners who are investigators themselves can vouch for this. There are so many cases that we go on where we find some form of intelligent activity, where we find someone in the house seems to show signs of having some type of ESP or precognitive abilities. It seems more often than not that seems to be the case in a lot of those situations. It's almost like they move in, the activity starts up because, and you have to wonder, is this activity starting up because of this person? Maybe these spirits feel that they're drawn to this person in an attempt to communicate.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. And if there's a person who has an ESP ability and they're seeing things, the first thing they're going to say, well, am I crazy? But you got that anxiety that comes with ESP, experiences. I mean, and our group's ready to deal with that, if ESP may be a trigger or a cause of something that's going on, or if it's, how do you help that person with their anxiety and dealing with the ESP they have? How do you deal with that? So you have to recognize that as a source of anxiety too, and that's something, if we don't consider ESP as a possible cause, that's an anxiety issue you're not going to be able to address. Another thing is, can your anxiety itself cause the issues?
Right, and that is something that I'm so glad that you're bringing up.
Well, I put on my website a link to a great video about the Phillips experiment. You know what the Phillips experiment is, right?
Yes.
Okay. But this happened up in Canada. It was in the 70s. And you had a parapsychologist who was very interested in trying to duplicate some of the spiritual seances, but actually wanted to try to make a ghost materialize. And he never made a ghost materialize, but he had an outstanding amount of success. Philip was created ghosts. He had a group of people meet every week for a long period of time and talk to this ghost that they created who was Philip. Everybody in the experiment knew that Philip was made up. He was not a real person. Never was. This whole story was created. But after time, all of a sudden they got knocked and rats communicating with them, and the table would chase them around. And so, the thought here is that they created paranormal experiences through ESP and through psychokinesis that was attributed to a ghost who never existed. And so the idea that, ESP, PK, that we could possibly create our own ghosts are not really there through other paranormal means is a possibility. And then you take another case called the Ashmaner ghost. This was, I believe, in the late 30s, early 40s maybe. It was in France. Dr. Nandor Fodor, I always butcher his name. He was a psychoanalyst who kind of studied under Freud. And this couple and their teenage daughter, they kept seeing this green ghost. And so Fodor brought in Elaine Garrett, who was a very notable psychic medium. You can read about her in the Airship R101. But in the first setting, Garrett, spirit guide, basically said, okay, I've talked to the ghost is going to be gone. And all of a sudden the next day, Fodor is approached by the husband, who comes back and then sees all excited. Well, the ghost came back. And he's sitting there going, why are you so excited that the ghost came back? So he brought Garrett back in again, and Garrett's spirit guide told him, yeah, well, the ghost is back because he wants him back. And so, Fodor's shaking his head going, why? What's going on? And so he starts confronting this family, and what he ends up finding out is that the husband is gay, which causes sexual tension in the family. Mm-hmm. So the wife is dealing with it by self-medicating herself. She's become addicted to drugs or alcohol, things like that. And this has created a lot of tension with their daughter. So you've got all these psychological things that are going on. And what the spirit guide had told Fodor, gave him the suggestion was, these people want this ghost here. They want, and so Fodor got this idea, they want this ghost here because the wife pretty much admitted they use the ghost as a way of focusing all the problems between them onto something else.
Right.
And so, and I've seen this. I've seen this with people. They instead of dealing with a lot of their own problems, I ran into many cases where, they try to blame it on the paranormal. I've walked into a case where, a friend got me to go to a case with them, and the couple leaves the house, and then they come back and they're totally drunk. Well, you know what? They're alcoholics.
Right.
It didn't take a whole lot of figuring out that the reason why the wife is so scared is not because there's ghosts in the house. It's because your boyfriend / husband is alcoholic and physically abuses you.
Right.
That's what the real fear there is. Mm-hmm. But because of the tensions that were going on, they were creating a ghost. And there's Dr. William Roll. He was probably one of the leading researchers in poltergeist cases, and studied numerous poltergeist cases. And I've got one of his articles, at least one, I know, on my website, talking about the Miami ghost, where it happened in a warehouse, but the person named Julio, he had a lot of resentment towards the owner, was creating all these PK effects. Or, there's cases where the child was frustrated with the parents, there was attention issues or negative feelings towards the parents and things like that. So, all this psychological turmoil going on would manifest itself into psychokinetic energy that some people claim was a ghost. And
mm-hmm.
the one thing about poltergeist cases that if you introduce counseling, the effects appear to go away.
Right, and that's the thing is, I tell people all the time that when they discuss poltergeist activity, I tell them that's the most difficult to deal with, because that takes dealing with a complete change of mentality of the person, of the people in the situation. They have to be the ones to take that empowerment to make those changes, to introduce that positivity in the situation, to alleviate the negativity that's the triggers for the poltergeist activity to begin with. And that can be one of the most difficult things. They aren't ready, they aren't sure themselves to take on that type of role, that type of responsibility. They want someone to fix it for them, and they don't trust themselves in some cases to do it.
Yeah. I had a case one time involved a young girl, and pretty much her parents died at an early age. She was living with her grandparents. Her grandparents died, and she was an orphan for a long time. She had a lot of psychological issues going on. And so she met a guy in the military or something with her boyfriend. I guess he joined us afterwards, but ended up leaving her alone. She started going to every paranormal group she could, but she was claiming that something was growling, at her and everything. And we had, when I went and talked to her, one of the groups she told me, in a bunch of cowboys, in Texas, but I was familiar with this group a little bit. This group would publish things about being scientific, but then you turn around and you watch the videos, and they're running around with a K2 meter, place that I knew had high EMF frequencies.
Right.
They had no idea what they're doing with the EMF detector. And she told me, she's like, well, these people, they took an EMF detector into the closet, and it was going off, and the guy was like, well, there's some EMF activity here. And it scares her. She doesn't know what to think. She's clueless to what this means.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy basically told her, he said, well, if you really want to know, well, if you provoke it, you might find out.
Right.
But that's the last thing you want somebody with all this anxiety to do, is to provoke it, And, so the other people have been talking to her online, and when I sat down and talked with her, I took a couple people with me. One of them was a person who claimed to be a medium, who was getting absolutely nothing, by the way. But, it really sounded like this was something that wasn't at a certain location. This was something that she went to different places, and whenever she was alone, she was experiencing it. And so I think the idea of her, she might be creating the sex of herself.
Right.
Either it's a psychological issue, if it's something that truly was paranormal, she was probably creating it out of her own fears of being alone,
Which is a very common fear.
Right. And so the effect was, though, whenever she would experience these things, she managed to get the effect of someone to coming there and to being with her and trying to get attention from her boyfriend who's caught between, I got to go to my military duty and doing this. And so, this could be another way of getting attention. And, it's kind of hard to sit down in these cases and to say, hey, what is this? Get them to look at this from another perspective. Try to get them to understand that the things that they're going through could be what's helping to create this situation going on. And it's a difficult thing to do. I've got a bachelor's degree in psychology. I'm by no means am I a licensed counselor, but I've worked in the juvenile correctional facility or industry for a long time, and I've been trained with some counseling techniques such as motivational interviewing, and that's where it's kind of like the Dr. Phil thing. Dr. Phil's like, how's that working out for you?
Right.
And so the idea here is to try to get them to talk about it and get them to come to their own self-awareness of that.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some issues they need to work out, and that these issues might be related to the problems that they're experiencing. And that was a very difficult part of trying to get her to realize that all the things that she's going through puts her in a state to where she could be experiencing these things. It's hard to explain to her, to someone like that, how in these situations. And you have to be respectful of the belief, and you have to work within their belief systems too. And even after that, people were like criticizing me. Well, you didn't help her. You didn't, and all this other stuff, and criticizing me for it until I explained to them more details about the case, and they're like, "Oh, I apologize. I wasn't aware. I didn't know all the details." But at first they want to criticize me because I guess I didn't come in with the photon guns ready to ghost the ghost.
Right. I've been doing this 14 years, and I'm still waiting on the day we get our proton packs.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where after time she's she was reporting to do much better after some time from what I hear, because she's learned to work through a lot of the problems that she had, and that's the good thing. But that's one of the things that the mental health industry has really looked at, but unfortunately a lot of the research that relates to the paranormal and mental illness and things like that, a lot of it is found in psychiatrist journals and psychological journals and medical journals. And it's hard to access from the public. You want to pay some great amounts for it, and then when you start trying to read the abstracts, it's almost like a foreign language.
Right.
But this is one journal article, for example, though, that I'm kind of reading from the abstract, and this article is called "Paranormal Experiences, Mental Health, and Mental Boundaries and C.A.S.P.I.R." Of course, C.A.S.P.I.R is the unknown mechanism for which E.S.P., psychokinesis could work. And in this abstract, it says, previous research has suggested that paranormal beliefs and experiences are associated with thinner mental boundaries and traumas during childhood. Significant correlations are found between paranormal experiences and mental boundaries, traumas, and negative life events. The overall results were not significant to the side task and no significant. Well, it's a bunch of mumble jumble, but what they did find here is that suggests that mainly mental boundaries concerning unusual experiences and childlikeness are associated with paranormal experiences. That experiences in your childhood and abuse as a child does seem to have a link with people as adults that have some ESP ability and mediumship ability. It's kind of odd. It's almost like because of the traumatic experiences that they had early on, they can seem to put themselves in a dissociative state.
Right. And that would make perfect sense. That's very easy to imagine how that would work.
Right, and so when you have situations where you've got and that's why I really think that more paranormal groups, they need to have people that they can refer to counseling, and even somebody has some kind of counseling background, possibly even come and do at least, there's a lot of times where investigations need was coming out and talking to people. I'm not going to go out there and set up a camera. I want to find out more about what the dynamics of the family are, what's going on. But if you've got mental health issues going on, this is a source of anxiety for these people.
Right. And that's why one of my pet peeves is, and you see it on so many of the TV shows, and you see a lot of teams that do this, where the first thing they want to do when they start up their investigation is they get the residents to leave, and they want them gone the whole time they're investigating. Now, and to me, that is completely and utterly backwards. How can you assess a situation if the key element is not there?
Exactly. I mean, again, how does the house seem to be haunted for some people and not haunted for others? I mean, if there is something paranormal going on, it could be a person that's the trigger of it.
Exactly.
You're not going to figure that out by running the people out. This is where an investigation should really be something that's more than just a fly-by-night thing. Maybe you should have some time, like a night where, hey, you do it when nobody's in the house.
Exactly.
But you should do it the times when people are in the house. They're doing their normal things. You're gonna if you really want to know what's going on with something, you've got to really take the time and spend and learn what all is going on, and try to figure out what all the variables are.
And something I've found to be very effective, like you mentioned, study the whole situation, learn how the dynamic of the household is, and
Exactly.
you know, maybe after you've gotten this picture put together, then of course, yes, you can investigate for a little while, just for comparative reasons, with no one there except for the investigation team. And we've had good results with maybe if there were several people living in the house, maybe bringing in one or two at a time and seeing how the results fluctuated with each person to kind of narrow down who the activity seemed to fluctuate the most when they were present. And that's a good strategy that we've used before. But
yeah, and I think those are good strategies. And you also got to, there's been several times where I just go and I talk to the people, I interview them. That's enough in itself. You find out what you need to know by talking to the people, and the information that you can share back with them is enough that they feel comfortable with, and they don't want the rest of the stuff.
Well, and I will say one thing that I've done also that I think helps us as investigators to understand and assess the situation, but also helps the clients, is from day one when they call me, I tell them to start taking a journal and to backdate it as best they can to as many of the paranormal events that they can remember, and to document if they have, say, anything that they think possibly is paranormal happens, to document that. But if they feel like they're being watched, if they just feel like they should, if they get the creeps for no apparent reason, write it down, but also write down what's going on. Is it dinner time? Is everyone watching TV? Are you in your bedroom by yourself? What's the situation? What's the mood in the house? And include those details as well. And I've found that by doing that, not only can we look over it and see the dynamic unfolding in front of us, but they can too. They can spot their triggers.
And just seeing the people to open up and talk, it's so much information. I had a case one time. It was really interesting. This lady had called me, got in contact with me, and I spoke with her. And this whole situation started over in iguana. Okay, she lived in a trailer house. She had a pet iguana. She loved this thing, and she would sometimes take it outside and let it roam around. And then one day, her roommate took the iguana outside, and the iguana got away.
Oh no!
So she's going out and she's taking photographs. She starts taking photographs at night, looking to see if she can find any photographic evidence of where this iguana might be. Okay? And then all of a sudden, she's trying to show these pictures to a friend, saying, look for the iguana. And instead, you see a blurred photograph at night with a dark area. And this lady's like, oh, well, what about the ghost there, Starts trying to suggest that there's something there that's really not.
Right.
And so suggesting that there's something paranormal going on around her house, too. Well, the interesting thing was that she also, around that time, seemed to have a prowler. She was having somebody come around and scratch on the windows and things like that. And I did have a medium that came and did part of the investigation with me. The medium, she's really great. She's documented that she actually has alpha brain waves that are different than normal people. Her brain functions differently, and she's gone through biofeedback up here at the University of Texas, because of it. Mm-hmm. Which also, by the way, she had a traumatic childhood. It's been interesting. But she starts asking me questions like, well, I'm not seeing any. Well, I'm seeing houses, but this isn't a house. I don't understand. Is this a trailer house? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. But how come there's no other trailer houses around? I don't get it. And then she goes, what's the deal with the lizard? Wow. She's picking up all this information. She's like, but there's nothing paranormal here. I'm like, yeah, I know. But the lady wanted me to come out and kind of do an investigation anyway. But as I come out too, what ends up happening is she's telling me, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not a ghost because I'm finding, I've come out and I found the footprints. There's footprints in the mud.
Right.
So what ended up happening was I stuck the cameras around the outside of a trailer house looking for prowlers, and watched. We were watching all night just to make sure we see if we could catch the prowler or not. But by the end of the night, she had already pretty much, as we talked about, and we just got her talking. She was pretty much convinced herself that her friend was full of it, and that everything that was happening was really with someone who coming out from the woods and was trying to scare her.
Right.
So, it's kind of a talk therapy, but you find out if you can find out a lot of information just by listening and letting them talk and get those things. And after everything was said and done, her anxiety was gone because she knew it was probably a prowler, and if it was the prowler, she knew how she was going to take care of it.
And something else as well with dealing with anxiety, and this is something I've seen often too, is a lot of people. Got a question from the chat. Did she find her iguana?
Did they ever find a lizard?
Mm-hmm.
Was this question? No, we never found the lizard. And the medium, she came out and was telling us that she wasn't. The medium really felt like the lizard was gone.
Right.
The lizard had died, and the thing is, it had been probably 5 or 6 weeks since the lizard died out. And the chances of that lizard was surviving was probably pretty thin anyway.
Right, I would imagine so. But yes, what I was saying is something that I've seen before, and I'm sure you've encountered this as well, where people. Everybody knows the psychological symptoms of anxiety or stress, but very few people are aware of the physical symptoms of anxiety and stress. And if you really look at it on paper, it seems like anxiety and stress can have more physical symptoms than psychological symptoms, because and I've seen that in some cases where a changing, life changes would come up, different job, maybe, marriage, divorce, whatever the situation may be, that puts them under a new load of anxiety. You see those physical symptoms start manifesting. And as these physical symptoms manifest, it's like they were mistaken for paranormal attacks. People felt like they were being watched. They were on edge. The heart racing, the shortness of breath. They felt like something was holding them down. Something was trying to choke them. Just all kinds of different physical symptoms that fall under the textbook symptoms of anxiety. And when you look at what's going on in their life, you see where there's plenty of key elements that would introduce that added level there. So how many times have you ran into similar situations like that?
Well, I think a lot. And one of the things the leader of my parapsychology group always asks is how come paranormal groups don't do a stress inventory when, questionnaire when they talk to their clients. That's a very good question, because the effects of stress have so many impacts, and it's just like you said, with the anxiety itself. As someone who suffers from anxiety, I can tell you the physical effects are pretty extreme.
Right.
I feel like my heart's racing. Sometimes it gets to where I can't function. There are times where I'm under so much stress that I don't care how much yoga you can do, or meditation, you can't calm yourself down, and I'll have to go to the doctor and say, hey, can you prescribe me some Xanax? That's the only way I can, And what was interesting was that in my late 20s, I started actually having seizures. I was having the petite mal seizures where I pass out and hit the floor, but I was having kind of the walking seizures too. And it took me a while, but I actually found a neurologist that said, well, we're not going to find anything on a scan. He said, because it's the same area of the brain that is related to your anxiety issues. So, because you notice that under times of high anxiety, that you're also having seizures. I was like, well, that's interesting. And so now you think about the electrical disturbances in the brain that could be caused from anxiety. One of the interesting things too, that when I had a seizure, whether it's one I passed out from or not, was I could always tell when it was about to happen. And that's because you get this sense of deja vu. My senses would be different. I would smell something unusual. And it's not a smell, it's just the fact that, my brain is not working and processing things correctly. And, hey, if your brain is working differently, I mean, is it possible that, with these things going on, could it trigger something paranormal as well? Well, it's certainly possible. And that's why I think, Native Americans, a lot of guys consider people who have epilepsy to be shamans because of it. Somebody asked about temporal lobe epilepsy, panic attacks are the seizures. Panic attacks and seizures, they are two different things. But for me, I'll have a panic attack, but a seizure, it becomes, I think that's the extreme. The panic attack is, seizure is much more extreme than a panic attack. But yeah, deja vu, that was certainly, because it was scary. I never wrecked a car from it, but there were times when I was driving and then like, oh, I'm fixing to have a seizure. I got to pull over now. And it's that deja vu feeling you get. Hey, it's about to happen. It's coming.
Right. And another question there in chat also is there any such thing as invisible forces physically touching people, or is that also considered a mental issue? Such as maybe being touched or scratched, things like that.
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't think any of us can have answers. I think in some cases it could be the paranormal. I think in some cases it could be a psychological issue going on as well. I mean, and that's one of the things where it's hard to really, you have to really figure out everything that's going on. But, I hate to say in any particular case that it's either way. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and I'm going to...
But I think anybody that could sit there and say they have a definitive answer, I think that both are a possibility. And, It just depends on the case, too.
Right. And I'm going to just insert my personal opinion here that I believe one of the key things is, and you having the anxiety issues that you face yourself, you know how difficult that in itself is. That in itself is a major battle. Well, then if you factor in someone that's facing that battle, maybe they don't know much about the paranormal, or on the other hand, maybe they're very superstitious, maybe they maybe they have a lot of fears of the paranormal, and they're put in the position that they think this unexplained activity is happening in their home. So then you have fear mixed with the anxiety, which makes for that compounding effect. So naturally, any of those physical symptoms are going to be just completely amplified. And I believe that a lot of that is based off of ambiguity, because if they think there's paranormal activity there, the fear, the terror is automatically going to kick in. And some of those physical symptoms at that point, I would suspect, are going to be, they're going to ambiguously think, wait, was that from my anxiety? Or are they going to attribute it to the paranormal activity? And that can be a tough call, figuring out which it is.
Well, I see here Kat has said something about physical manifestations can result from emotional and psychological issues too. Now, and I think that's an interesting thing too. You look at poltergeist cases. There have been some poltergeist cases where there are apparitions occurring there too. Now, the apparitions that tend to be documented they're not very well defined. They're more abstract. They don't have the same detail as other type of apparitions that have been seen. But there are apparitional experiences that are sometimes created from what seems to be a poltergeist issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what they were trying to do with the Phillips experiment. They were actually trying to see if they could create a physical manifestation from PK. They never got that, but that's what their ultimate goal is they were trying to create that, because they were trying to see, hey, back in the spiritual sphere, where, most of it was cheesecloth and things like that.
Right.
We were actually trying to see if it wasn't possible that some of the mediums from the spiritual era were actually creating something paranormal from psychokinesis.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, yeah, that's certainly a possibility as well. I mean,
right, and for anyone who's not familiar with what he was talking about, those photos, if you ever look online, you can Google it, I'm sure, you'll see those old black and white photos with what looks like it's too thick to be smoke, but you see this material in front of the people, and like Ty was saying, in most cases turned out to be cheesecloth or something similar. Most of those pictures were indeed faked and later disproved, but there is definitely that possibility.
Well, and that's where the term ectoplasm comes from. It's not from the ghost movies. Ectoplasm is actually what they were trying to call this unusual mist that would happen in the seance rooms.
Mm-hmm.
You know that, who was it the actor that was in the movie? Played Ray, who created the movie. Can't think of his name. He actually got the idea to create the movie because, because of his father's interest in the paranormal.
Was it Dan Aykroyd, I believe?
Dan Aykroyd, yes. Yep. I mean, he got the idea of creating the Ghostbusters movie from his dad's interest in the paranormal. And so, the term ectoplasm that they were using in the Ghostbusters movie actually comes from the spiritualist era when they were creating the ectoplasmic mists from the cheesecloth. And but the idea is that maybe not all, it wasn't cheesecloth every time. That maybe whether they were actually creating it through paranormal, something paranormal from it, though.
Well, and as far as ectoplasm goes, that, we've all seen the photos where someone catches fog in a photo that they take at night, and they say that's not fog, that's not steam, that's an ectoplasmic mist. And so that's definitely one of the more debated topics as well, is, what indeed, constitutes ectoplasm. And I believe that a lot of the photos, the proof that they had at the time when they were doing, like we're talking about, faking a lot of the photos, went off of so much superstition that was prevalent at the time. And a lot of people don't realize, how in the paranormal community, how hated Harry Houdini was, with a lot of the work that he did to disprove a lot of the people who were faking this evidence, who were scamming these people. If you look at the record of the mediums that he disproved, the photos he disproved, I can't remember the name. You may remember the case of the pictures with the two girls that every time they took a picture, they would have fairies show up in the pictures around them.
Yeah, I don't know the name, but I know what you're. Yeah.
And it later turned out to be the fairies they had cut out of a magazine, and that it was completely fake, but they puzzled people for years and years over that. And it's there's so many things that maybe even today we can't explain, but who knows, tomorrow we might make that breakthrough. But what would you suggest when you're interviewing a client? Are there any key factors you would look for or suggest to maybe indicate that person may have an underlying issue mentally or emotionally that may be causing some of what they're experiencing, but it not be paranormal, it be a mental or emotional issue?
Well, again, I kind of go back to using the whole motivational interviewing skill that I've learned, where you're asking open-ended questions. I also try to familiarize myself with the things that are on, like the stress questionnaire, the life. You can find these easily online, but it's for life events that are stressful and everything. And I would try to learn those things, but kind of instead of just giving them a questionnaire and having them answer, kind of have them in as you talk. But if I sit down with somebody, okay, well, you want to listen to this, have some empathy and get an idea of what's going on. But after you get to the point where you've had them describe the things that they're going through and things like that, then it's kind of opening up and saying, why do you think these things are happening? You start trying to get an opinion, their opinion of why things are happening as well, Mm-hmm. And, ask them, kind of get a feel of how they responded and what they've done in these situations, and I just kind of go from there. But I pretty much, instead of, hey, I know the answer, I'm going to give it to you, here it is, boom.
Right.
I ask opening questions and make them think to it, make them think about what's going on or how they feel about the situation. And that's really kind of how I approach it. there are other, there may be other psychological tools that you can use out there that you can integrate into it for to look for other things besides stress. And you know, I can't think of them on the top of my head, but I mean, you know, those are definitely things that I would look for. You know, you just use that open-ended thing and let them talk.
Right.
Let them give you the answers.
Now, do you have any suggestions for a situation like Kat in the chat has mentioned she's dealing with a client with dementia? What would you do, or do you have any advice for someone? Maybe it is an elderly person that has Alzheimer's that seems to be the target, or you know, there's someone with dementia where they might have a situation or a condition that would cause you to doubt it naturally, but yet the family, the people that come in, are seeing enough strange occurrences to really warrant an investigation. Well, how would you recommend approaching that?
I don't know. I mean, I see that she said her family enabled it and had to walk away, and yeah, that's a tough one. When you've got enablers in the family and you can't make any progress, you know, I understand how they're feeling there, because it's like at some point you have to say, hey, I've come to the end of where I can help you. I mean, there's not much else I can do for you. But, you know, if you have someone that's willing to work, I mean, dementia, that's where I would see someone who's got, you know, more experience, an actual licensed professional counselor with that. I mean, that's where I would be going to other people for advice too, because that one. Does that make sense?
Right. That's definitely where you wouldn't want to put yourself in that position to make a statement or say something that could come back on you. You definitely need to get extra advice. I agree with that 100%.
But that's where, you know, at least in the area around where I'm at, at least I know of counselors, people in counseling positions that are also opened up to the paranormal. They're not going to sit there and tell somebody crazy because they experience the paranormal. You know, I know enough people in the area that they are professional counselors, but they understand the paranormal, and I can send them, you know, for a referral. You know, and we've done that when we needed to. But you know, if you can find people that are sensitive to that and you can send them to, that's a great thing. That's a resource that really needs to be probably even used more often. And that's my suggestion too. I mean, just look for, if you can find people who are, you know, counselors in your area that they're open to this paranormal, that have that understand that, hey, you know, they're not going to sit there and call somebody crazy because they sense something paranormal.
Right. And that's one of the biggest fears that people have. And I've seen that fear of people being told that they're crazy because they're having these experiences as one of the major contributing factors to the anxiety they already have, which just compounds it even more. It's really it's a horrible situation when you see it.
Well, and that comes the factor with the ESP thing. You know, if you've got a child who's got some ESP types of those, and my mother talked about this. My mother always had that problem when she was a child because our family was a very, very staunch, Pentecostal family, and you know, my mother kind of had a little bit of ESP precognition or thing, and she actually would go to my grandmother and say, hey, this person is going to pass away soon, and you know, how's someone from my heavy Pentecostal family going to react to a child just blurting that out? Well, yeah, I mean, you probably got your mouth slapped or something. I mean, that's pretty traumatic because you basically you get a child of the devil,
Right.
3 days later, when that person passes away, then your child's demonic, your child's doing demonic stuff, and that you think about the problems that creates, and so.
Right, and that type of experience and the psychological impacts that's going to have, that's going to create a predestined amount of ambiguity toward negative paranormal activity for the rest of that child's life. That's it, and that goes back to superstition. And I know I've said the word ambiguity a lot during the show, but that's something that if you're not familiar with that term and how it relates to the psychological approach of the paranormal aspect, look it up, understand that, because it is something that we see so often and have to overcome. And I've actually posted a link, or well, I think Ross posted a link to your website, to the provingparanormal.com. And
provingparanormal.com. Yeah, this, like I said, I was working on a book. It's still a ways from being finished, but the idea behind the book was, and I kind of saw this earlier in the chat too, is how do you prove it? How do you prove the paranormal? And that's where the title comes from, Proving Paranormal.
mm-hmm.
And it's a discussion of what would it take to prove the existence of ghosts. And so that's where the theme of the book was going. And chat posted Feathers of the White Crow on it, because that's what, the title of the website actually it had a different address earlier than that. And if I ever had gotten to the point where I was using the website for the book, and I was going to change the title of the website too. But Feathers of the White Crow on it, yeah. And you know what the Feathers of the White Crow is, right?
That I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. I posted, I think on the homepage, quotes from a psychiatrist, Diane Hennessy Powell, and she was actually quoting William James, the father of modern psychology. William James was one of the early psychical researchers in the 1880s. He was a Harvard professor who basically started psychology in the United States. But when they first psychical researchers first started out, they were studying mediums.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the mediums they were finding involved in the spiritual era are in the spiritualist movement. Even the psychical researchers were finding that these people were fakes, they were frauds.
Right.
But they came across Lenora Piper. And Lenora Piper was different. She wasn't a seance medium. She was my mind's going blank, it's getting late. But she's more a channeler.
Mm-hmm.
And they studied her for years, and she was quite a bit different. And they didn't know where she was getting all this stuff that she was coming up with. But William James pretty much described her as being the white crow. She was the one that stood out.
Right.
She was different than the rest, and so if you want to prove that mediumship is there is such thing as ability leadership, as now I'm starting to say, if there is such a thing as mediumship and everything, if this really does exist, don't look at all the black crows out there that are, look at the one white crow. Look at the one, study the one that actually does seem to be legitimate and it's different.
That's an excellent point.
And she was the white crow. She was the white bird that helped really kick off the psychical research.
And I'm looking on the site and I'm seeing. I went through there a little earlier, a few days ago, and I mean, just you have so many links up there to. I mean, just reading off from the apparition types, the types of ghosts and hauntings, and on down into psychokinesis, going into orbs, EMF, EVP, photography, perception and matrixing, even into out of near-death experiences, out-of-body experience. I mean, there's just a wealth of information because I've seen how many videos, how many links to other sites are on the site as well, and so it's a great resource for anyone in the paranormal.
And that's why I created it. I was trying to find a way to put a lot of different information together. And you've got information in there from believers. You've got information from skeptics. And yeah, you do have some information in there that comes from critics, people who are against the paranormal. But you have a site where you can look at. You have a set of information about different topics and different things, and it kind of the idea is to show that, hey, don't go to television to find your information. There's a wealth of information out there that's just that needs to be understood and studied. We were talking about books earlier too. There's a link for recommended books too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep, I'm actually just had that, and there's so many books out there that people need to read, and there's I'm looking at some of the authors that you have on the recommended books list here that I personally studied myself when I was first getting in, from Hans Holzer and from Harry Price. Those are great books those should be considered the standards for what, even if an investigator isn't going to get into parapsychology per se, they should study that to make themselves a better, more well-rounded investigator. They need to understand this and use it to their advantage.
Well, and yeah, that's kind of why I created. I wanted that information. Hey, it's taken me years to put together the information. I mean, I was getting journal articles and photocopying for myself and everything else, and so I'm sitting here with all these books and all these journal articles and all this information, and it's like, well, how do you put it all together? And so I just created a website. I looked at it, and there I could tell there's some links that looks like some of the links have become judged, but we're talking about the C.A.S.P.I.R. I actually have under the Ghosts and Hauntings, where you can actually read an insert from Fodor's book, and it gives you the complete publication of him talking about the C.A.S.P.I.R. ghost.
Right.
That's just stuff that you're not going to really find other places. I mean, and that's something that was not easy for me to get a hold of.
Right, and that's something sad is when you have some of the books that maybe aren't quite as renowned as some of the others, but still an excellent book, and you can't find it anywhere. There's several great books.
But it wasn't an easy find. You can find it out there, but yeah.
But and And we're about to have to wrap things up before long, but if you had to leave anyone listening as an investigator any advice, what would you tell them to do to help them be more effective in, understanding their clients and working with them, working with the psychological issues?
The suggestions I have is just two things. One is research. Don't question everything. And study lots of things. Okay. And the other one, I guess, is just beware of the ego.
Right.
Beware of your own ego. When we get an ego to the idea where, hey, I'm an expert, I know this, and I know what's going on, this person doesn't. That's what really, I think, really kills the skills. I mean, it's all about my group and what I'm doing and everything. That was something I did. It was a survey that I put out several times, and I asked a question, or two questions in the survey, one at the front and one at the back, and the question was, hey, if you were having electrical disturbance in your house and objects moving and things like that, who would you want in your house? Would you want Jason's plant? Would you want Larry Black clean? The other, William Persinger, Michael Rowe, the people from Paranormal State, Ryan Well, and the guys from the Ghost Adventurers. Okay, a lot of people saying the Ghost Adventure guys, a lot of people saying the TAPS people, and then some people would just scratch it out and say, no, I want my own team.
Right.
My own team is the only team good enough to do the investigation. But then at the end of the whole questionnaire, at the end, you ask the question, okay, if someone came to you and they were having certain things happen in their house, who would you want to investigate the house? 2 plumbers, a paramedic, and an IT tech, which is the Twin Brothers, a guy who was a journalist student, or a guy who was a wedding DJ, and his buddy was a former brew employee, which is the Ghost Adventure guys.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you have 2 parapsychologists, one that studies poltergeist activity and the other that studies EMS effects on the brain? And of course, everybody's like, well, the parapsychologists. And my question is okay, how come you didn't put that answer to that almost exact same question as the first of the survey? But that's because people don't know who Michael Persinger are. People don't know who William Rowe are. But they know the Ghost Adventures guys. They know the TAPS guys, and that's kind of the sad thing. They know about EMF and things like that, but they don't know where it comes from. They don't know who Michael Persinger is. They don't know William Rowe. And that's what we need to fix. And so that's my advice. I mean, if somebody says, oh, EMF is related to the paranormal, ask why. Ask where they got that theory from. Try to figure out where it comes from. Ask questions and do some real good research on it. That's my suggestions, really.
Right. I definitely agree. Do the research, learn, educate yourself, question things. There's popular theories that are out there that some people read and agree with that I personally, I'll read. Like stone tape theory, for instance, is one that I use for example, because there are a lot of elements that I look at it and I agree with, but a lot of it I kind of look at it and think, no, that looks too much like a loophole here. That doesn't cover this or this. And that's what you have to do. Is you have to do your own research. You have to, hit the books, study, form your own knowledge base, and apply that when you're going on these investigations, and put that together. Use it along with your experience. Let it work together. So that's what it takes. Make yourself a better rounded investigator.
Right.
Well, Ty, it has been great having you on the show. I appreciate you coming on and talking with us tonight.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, and I think I turned your 1 hour show into a 2 hour show.
Hey, that's okay. The way we are with this show, as long as we're learning, we'll keep going, and that's what it's all about, is us all putting our minds together and seeing if we can find out what's going on. So maybe the unexplained isn't quite as unexplained as it was last night. So that's the goal, and we definitely appreciate you helping us out with it. And we got your website information out there, provingparanormal.com. If you're listening, go to that site, go ahead and click on that button that says add to favorites. You can spend hours on that site, and it's a wonderful, wonderful resource for teams out there. And do you have any events going on right now, or anything coming up?
No. I'm actually, due to paranormal drama and everything else, I really, I don't do a whole lot of paranormal things these days. I found more time to work on my book and do Boy Scout things and things like that. So, I still have people that, friends, and they've invited me to go do things, and, so occasionally I might go out and do something, but, it's like, I try to do a paranormal event, and, the egos that are out there and cause drama, and
Right.
So I'm kind of done. And that's kind of the reason why when just all the drama that's out there, that that's one of the reasons why I've really thought about if I do go get my book done to publish it, that I'm going to publish it under a pseudonym, just because I want the book to stand on its own merits. I don't want it to be, what's his name over there? Is he publishing a book? I'm not publishing a book to put my name out there. I'm publishing a book because I'm hoping people will read it and learn something,
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, nothing really going on much for me.
Well, between what you've got on the site itself, between maintaining it, I know you've got children we were talking about, and I know how that's 2 full-time jobs in itself, and working on the book, that's quite a bit to keep you occupied. So we definitely won't hold that against you at all. And we have a question from the chat about what the time frame might be on the book, if you have any idea when it may be available.
Oh my goodness, I don't know.
I think that one thing that we should definitely agree on is, as soon as you get the book finished and ready to release, we definitely need to have you back on the show to talk about the book.
Yeah, definitely, because I would say it's probably about halfway to 3/4 finished, maybe. Once I get certain parts of it done, there was a couple people I was going to interview. And the thought was that actually after that, publishing that second part of it where I'm interviewing very specific people. But kind of as you can tell from my website, there's a lot of information out there, and I'm really trying to pack a lot of that information into the book. So I'm that kind of person where if I'm going to say something, I want to be able to back up what I'm saying. And so, that becomes difficult. And that's kind of where it's taken so long to process all the information and get it into the book. So I'm hoping over the holidays, I can spend some more time doing that, working on it some more. But unfortunately, yeah, it's already been in the process for a couple of years, so I really
Right.
I don't know how much longer it's going to take me. I hope to be able to find some time and get some more of it done.
Right. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to having you back on the show again. And I can't speak for everyone else, but I'm sure they'll agree with me. I know I've learned a lot, and I thank you for that. Thank you for all your hard work that you've put into doing the site as well. That's I take care of the C.A.S.P.I.R Paranormal team's website, and I know how much of an undertaking just those few pages are, and you have such a wealth of information. That is a lot of time there. So
Also, somebody's actually looking at the site, so.
Right. Well, your work is definitely appreciated. So, with that being said, I thank you for being on the show tonight. And once again, it being Veterans Day, we're going to thank all the veterans out there, especially the ones that have tuned in. If you're hearing this, thank you for your service and what you're doing. And we hope everyone has a good night, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Paranormalities and Ponderings with the C.A.S.P.I.R Paranormal team, brought to you by the Paranormal King Radio Network. We hope you enjoyed the show, and will tune in again next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Please be safe as you're out there, especially if you're investigating the paranormal. Take care, have a good night, and happy hauntings. Thank you again from the C.A.S.P.I.R Paranormal team.